park's most iconic animals is its mountain goats. The large white animals with horns and 2 layers of wool that help them stay extra warm during Glacier's frigid winters. Their dense coat allows them to survive in temperatures as cold as minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, I don't think I'd mind a coat like that to get myself through those cold winter days either. Mountain goats often loiter on cliffs above us or eat in wildflower-filled meadows. In the summer, they mainly eat wildflowers, grassy plant with small flowers. They also spend a fair amount of time at natural salt lakes, although park scientists are studying if the mountain goats are spending less time at natural salt lakes in favor of human salt, which ends up in the form of sweat on hand railings and, sadly, urine on the side of trails, and even sadder, antifreeze leaks in parking lots. The park scientists also want to know how climate change is affecting the goats, since they only live in the subalpine and alpine areas of the park, which are the coldest and highest areas. Glacier is experiencing warming at an astonishing rate of 3 times the global average at higher elevations. How mountain goats respond to the warming temperatures remains to be known. Because of these studies, we may see mountain goats with radio collars, which help researchers track their movements. There's something of a celebrity in the park named Gracie the Bark Ranger. We may have seen or met her at Logan Pass. Gracie, a border collie, is the only dog allowed on trails in the park. Now, that said, she's not playing fetch or taking leisurely strolls when she's out and about. Gracie's job is to keep visitors and wildlife a safe distance apart. Always on leash and in her orange vest, she moves bighorn sheep and mountain goats out of high traffic areas, popular trails. Sometimes those animals will clear out of an area just when they sense her presence. Professionally trained, she only moves ungulates. That's hoofed animals. And she works alongside her owner, Mark Beal, who is Glacier's Natural Resource Program Manager. But that's not her only job. She also works with Mark as a wildlife ambassador. Gracie attracts visitors to Mark, which gives him a chance to talk with people like us about wildlife safety and more. Remember we talked earlier about how the Blackfeet and other tribes are partnering with the park to explore bison reintroduction? Well, they're also involved in other park-related initiatives. In fact, we may have seen Blackfeet youth and young adults working in the park, doing everything from loon monitoring to trail work, right down to invasive species eradication through a program called Pikunni Land Service Corps. That is part of an 11-week paid conservation program for Blackfeet youth to do field work on tribal and public lands. There's also Blackfeet-owned businesses that serve park tourists, like Sun Tours, an authorized National Park Service concessionaire that's been offering Black tours on going to the Sun Road and Blackfeet country for over 30 years. Okie dokie, my friends, time to roll up our windows. After this next curve, we're going to drive along a section of road known as the Weeping Wall. Now, our experience with the Weeping Wall is a little bit different depending on the time of year. If it's still relatively... The road engineers didn't choose this section as a practical joke to soak drivers and passengers. Nope. In fact, it was the roadwork itself that changed the flow of streams above and accidentally created this little piece of wet fun. Now they put large drains in to stop the flowing water from ripping up the road surface all the time. If you're looking at the Weeping Wall and wondering what the fuss is all about, then it's most likely that the snowmelt has nearly finished. This section is part of the long ridge called the Garden Wall, or Mount Grinnell, named after the explorer George Bird Grinnell. It got its name from George and his friends who were camping in the region. Because they didn't have Wi-Fi or radios, they used to sit around the campfire and sing songs for entertainment in the evening. Yep, these folks were singing a popular song from the day, Over the Garden Wall. Someone looked up and said, "That's one garden wall we can't get over," and the name stuck. Well, by now, I'm sure we've seen a few of those famous red jammer buses go by. The vintage buses are from the 1930s and were the first authorized motor transportation utility allowed in the parks. Before the jammers, the first tour buses were horse carriages on the road. The rollback roof is great for taking in the scenery. The brilliant red color was chosen to match a ripe mountain ashberry. The drivers are called jammers because they could be heard jamming the gears of the buses as they grinded up the steep inclines. The fleet of 33 buses in Glacier are considered to be the oldest touring fleet anywhere in the world. And get this, as we continue driving, we should get some nice views to a major waterfall across the valley. It has a pretty cool name, Bird Woman Falls. It's believed to be named after the wife of one of the Blackfeet Nation guides, though the origins are... As we look for it, I want to go back to our conversation about glaciers and ask you a question. Does it matter if the park's glaciers disappear? Honestly, the answer is yes. And it's not just because the wildlife and plants that thrive in the environment will be impacted. Remember when we talked about the continental divide and how water there ends up in 3 river basins that supply millions of people with water to drink, wash clothes in, and irrigate farms? If permanent sources of water like glaciers disappear, so does the amount of water in the river basins. That means less water for the people and animals who depend on it. Disappearing glaciers also mean the park can become more vulnerable to wild. Yeah, all very sobering thoughts for such a short time frame. All right, after this next curve, we can pull off on our right to Bird Woman Falls Overlook and catch some incredible views of this 500-foot-high natural wonder.
Oh, there's the red buses.
Long before the road existed or before the train arrived bringing tourists to what felt like a very wild area, a pagan branch of Blackfeet lived here, going back dozens of generations, spanning more than 10,000 years. Now just think about how long you've lived in your town and how well you know it. Then imagine if your family had lived in that same area for 10,000 years. Yeah, it kind of casts a new light on the term family traditions, doesn't it? Well, the Blackfeet, whose nation is east of Glacier National Park today, followed a nomadic life that brought them as far south as Yellowstone and all the way north into Canada. But they called the area known as the park today as the backbone of the world. What's incredible is wildfires and melting glaciers have revealed evidence of their ancestors' bison hunts, going back almost 5,000 years, with park researchers discovering bison bones, skulls, teeth, and more. For most of their recent history, the Blackfeet were feared by many tribes as 15,000 people strong. For a long time, they controlled almost all of Montana, and encounters with white people were peaceful. But then things started to fall apart for the Blackfeet and other tribes when the U.S. Army waged its campaign against bison from 1830 to 65, killing 40 million bison. Since tribes like the Blackfeet relied on bison for meat, clothes, and shelter, as well as spiritually, the animal's disappearance was devastating. That's an understatement. In 1895, the Blackfeet, on the brink of starvation, sold their lands that make up Glacier National Park today to the U.S. government. Didn't make much sense to the elders back then that anyone could own land or the wild animals that lived on it. 10 years before the tribe was forced to sell their land, Chief Crowfoot said, "We cannot sell the lives of men and animals. Therefore, we cannot sell this land. It was put here for us by the Great Spirit, and we cannot sell it because it does not belong to us." Chief Crowfoot's view of the world was so different than the Euro-American view of land ownership. Can you imagine what life would be like for us if his view prevails? 10,000 Blackfeet live on 1.5 million acres east of Glacier and south of the Canadian border. There's a very long and steep drop-off that falls away from the road here. You can take my word for it, it can be really intimidating peering over the edge. This wall is where the biggest construction blasts happened on the entire route when workers were building. Didn't want enormous holes ruining the landscape, so guys nicknamed powder monkeys hung onto ropes along the wall. First, they chiseled out a hole in the rock by hand. That sounds hard enough already. Then they plunged a small amount of explosives into the hole. To avoid any unwanted sparks, they wore big wool socks over their hobnailed boots. It took 3 weeks to bring in 500 kegs of black powder and 80 crates of dynamite on horseback for what was called the Big Shoot. Just imagine, when the dust settled, a worker was quoted as saying it was level as a finished roadbed. Not quite sure if that was just hopeful optimism. We're coming up to the only real hairpin switchback corner on the entire route, and it's actually a pretty iconic section of the road. It's called the Loop, and we'll see why as we approach it. This is one of those places where we have to take a selfie to prove we were here. There is parking on the inside of the loop, so if we see a space, let's just grab it. Now, no need to worry if that small lot is full. There's more parking below it, too. It is a pretty spot and masterfully crafted. The parking lot, the masonry guard walls, and the steps on the inside of the 75-foot radius loop are the original ones built back in 1927 by just one stonemason. We'll notice that experienced fire, notably during the Trapper Creek fire. You can walk just a little way along the Granite Park Trail to see close up how the forest is rejuvenating itself. If we had plans for a long hike, the trail from here takes you all the way to Granite Park Chalet. Now, it is a challenging but actually quite popular 8 miles out and back hike. Here comes the West Tunnel, one of my favorite human-made structures on this entire route. Let's slow down a little bit as we drive inside. The workers here blasted and jackhammered a 192-foot-long tunnel. We'll see 2 observational windows inside, and they're a great place to visit and take a photo if we park after the tunnel, walk back in. 1924. While going to the Sun Roads route was being planned, Stephen Mather, the first director of the National Park Service, along with a posse of engineers and architects, rode horses into the valley and up over the Continental Divide. When they got to Logan Pass, can you imagine? They just stood staring out at the view. At the time, those involved with the road debated the best possible routes to connect the east side of the park to the west. National Park Service engineer George Goodwin, who was an authority on mountain road construction, stood there and waved his arms back and forth, envisioning switchbacks like they had in Europe. He thought there should be 15 switchbacks on this side of the valley and another 3 on the eastern side of the park. As a car's zigzag, driver would see the cars below zigzagging the other way on a steep 8% grade. Goodwin thought the switchbacks would be a spectacular engineering feat and an attraction people would flock to see. Also in the party was Thomas Vint, a landscape architect, who disagreed. He boldly stated that Goodwin's switchbacks would look like a logging or mining road, causing huge scars on the pristine environment that they were all working to protect. Vint suggested making one long road that would be benched into the sedimentary rock of the garden wall and follow more closely the natural grade. Now, it would take way longer to construct and, of course, be far more expensive, but it would leave the landscape preserved. Mather grew tired of the men arguing and took off on his horse. I'll bet Mr. Goodwin, the engineer, probably didn't like being upstaged on a mere landscape architect. Regardless, Mather took the men's ideas to another trusted surveyor named Frank Kittredge, who ended up directing the survey for the road. Kittredge agreed with Vint's longer road with only one switchback concept. Even though the switchbacks were cheaper, Mather chose the more scenic route, noting so eloquently, "It performs its work more silently."
Good job.
By 1924, roughly 29 of the 51 miles of the road had been constructed, starting from both the west and east sides of the route, most of which was relatively easy construction, following the shorelines of the long lakes. The 8 miles along what is called the Garden Wall above the loop was well known to be the toughest. So now, it was time to get into some serious road work, and the crews were assembled. 135 men would work in 3 shifts of 32 men per crew. Since it was quite a distance away, while one crew worked, one was traveling into the work site and one was heading out. A year later, with a bid of just over $800,000, a construction firm from Tacoma, Washington was selected to start the construction of the steep west side sections of the Trans Mountain Road, or the Logan Pass Road. My friends, let's take a survey. What is the lowest hourly wage you've worked for? Well, those who built the road were paid 50 cents to a word, depending on skill level and job. Remember, it was built during the 1920s and early 30s, and when the Great Depression hit, men were desperate for work. Even though this work was very seasonal, they took it. At the peak of construction, more than 300 men were scattered throughout the valley, living in tent camps. The laborers were the cheapest to employ at the 50 cents per hour range. Then cat skinners, the guys who drove bulldozers and graders, were the best paid, along with the powder monkeys. Powder monkeys were the guys who hung off the cliffs by ropes, drilling holes and filling them with dynamite to blast away the rock faces. Then next to powder monkey, guess who the most important person on the crew was? Local farmers and their sons were also hired to work on going to the Sun Road, and that helped the economies of communities nearby. One young Montana lad showed up to work as a cat skinner, and the foreman waved him off, saying, "You're a little too young, kid." The kid replied, "See that guy working the grader? That's my little brother, and I taught him everything he knows." Yep, he got hired on the spot. Since we entered Glacier National Park, I've mentioned the term Continental Divide several times. Now, that is a term you may not be familiar with, so I'm going to explain it. Running from north to south through the entire North America, there's a line of mountains where rainfall and snowmelt either flows west towards the Pacific Ocean or east towards the Atlantic. If we were to stand with our legs straddled across the Continental Divide and drop some water just 1 foot on the west side, and imagine it doesn't absorb into the ground, that water would find its way into a stream that would find its way into a river, which would eventually empty into the Pacific Ocean. Here in Glacier National Park, water on the west side of the Continental Divide mostly finds its way to the Flathead River. The Flathead River eventually joins the mighty Columbia, which drains into the Pacific at the border of Washington and Oregon. Now, if we drop that water on the east side of the Continental Divide, the same thing would happen, only it would find its way to a river that would eventually reach the Gulf of Mexico and then the Atlantic Ocean. But Glacier is unique in that it has what's called a triple divide point. All right, I need you to stay with me here. That means that water falling on the east side of the Continental Divide can flow to Mexico, but it can also be separated to flow to the north, which means it joins a watershed system that eventually drains into the Hudson Bay in Canada's far northeast. Because Glacier's water flows into 3 major river basins, millions of people are dependent on the water that flow from here for their drinking water. The next time we use a water bottle filling station in the park, we can thank the mighty mountains surrounding us for the fresh, high-quality water. Goodness, the valley floor feels good, doesn't it?
Yes,
The
it
road
does.
is straightened out, the river is starting to widen and meander. Up ahead is Avalanche Creek, which offers us a wonderful opportunity to explore a dense cedar hemlock forest filled with ferns, mosses, and trees that are more than 500 years old. Surprisingly, the area feels very much like a forest we'd find in the Pacific Northwest. And in fact, Avalanche Creek marks the farthest east that western red cedar trees live. What makes is we didn't see any forest like this on the east side of the park. As we may have noticed, the east side is dominated by lodgepole pine trees, and it looks more like what we'd imagine the forests of the Rocky Mountains to look like, drier and dramatic. Now you may be wondering, like I did, why the west side and east sides of the park are so different. Well, for one, the east side is windier, bringing warm winds in the winter and drier winds in the summer. Conversely, the west side benefits from the Pacific Coast rains that travel over the Cascades to here. But there's something else. It turns out the Rocky Mountains are at their narrowest point in the Continental Divide, here in Glacier. So we have two very different ecosystems, the Pacific Coastal ecosystem and the Great Plains ecosystem. And they coexist closer than anywhere else along the Continental Divide. I don't know. The way I see it, we're getting two parks for the price of one, aren't we? Just up ahead on the left will be the pullout for the Avalanche Creek area that we were just talking about, and well worth the stop. The boardwalk trail, called Trail of the Cedars Nature Park, is only about a half-mile long. After that, it turns into a well-trodden path that follows the creek to Avalanche Lake. Now that's a 4.5-mile out and back, moderately difficult hike, but we'll get to see 6 waterfalls in view during spring. If we decide to stroll the boardwalk or do that hike, make sure we carry along our water bottles and our bear spray and not get them mixed up.
What are you laughing at?
Mix out the bear spray and the waters.
No parking space at all.
Yep.
Even though the valley has flattened out, there are still a few spots where the river cascades over some ledges, and they can be spectacular. We have 2 waterfalls coming up that are both easy to access from the roadside. I'm going to tell us about them now, but then point out the parking areas as we get closer. Neither of these waterfalls is going to break any height or volume records, but they're pretty in their own way, especially if the weather is nice and we catch the mountain backdrop with the fall's view. First up is the Dancing Cascade. At these falls, there's a footbridge that crosses the river, which provides a really great view. The second falls are McDonald Falls. Now, if I had to pick one of the two, I'd choose Sacred Dancing Cascade. But both are right beside the road, so no need to miss either of them. Or we can stop at Sacred Dancing, then follow the Riverside Trail for a few hundred yards, and we get to see them both in one stop. After the waterfalls, our next place of interest is the Lake McDonald Lodge, which in itself is worth seeing, not to mention if we're hungry and want to sit down for a bite to eat. There's a main dining room, a pizzeria and bar, and both serve Montana craft beer, all of which are first come, first serve. But a short walk from the lodge are boat cruises, horseback rides, stand-up paddleboards and kayak rentals, even ranger programs, and a general store. I highly recommend we stop here, if for no other reason than to stand on the lakeshore and take in the stunning views and crystal clear waters. I'll tell us more about the lodge area as we get closer. For some pop trivia. Earlier on our drive, we talked about how the opening scene of the movie The Shining was filmed on the east side of the park. Remember, it's the scene of the VW Bug driving on Going to the Sun Road past Wild Goose Island. Well, there are several other movies that were filmed along here too. Among them, Hidalgo, starring Viggo Mortensen, Beethoven 2, starring that dog. And then there was Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which featured the famous Grinnell Point, a 7,604-foot-high peak in Manny Glacier area of the park. Some of those might seem like a little bit old now, and partly that's because getting permission to film inside national parks is a whole lot more difficult than it used to be. There are stricter controls in place, in no way disturbed. Here's one that I'm sure we'll know. The movie was released in 1994 with a scene filmed on the east side of the park. It featured an actor running across a stone bridge. If you saw the movie, you'd know that this actor played a character that ran all the way across America and all the way back again several times just, well, because. Did you get it? Yes, Forrest Gump. Though, in fairness, Forrest Gump did feature a lot of iconic locations across the country, didn't it?
It did.
After this bend, we'll see the parking area for the Sacred Dancing Cascade on the right. Then follow the stairs down to the bridge. Remember, you can follow the walking trail from here to McDonald Falls, too. If we just prefer to drive to McDonald Falls, that's only about another 600 yards further down the road. Minute or two, we'll see a brown and white sign that shows the right-hand turn for Lake McDonald Lodge. And good news, visitors are welcome. The rich and famous, and even sometimes the average Joe came for a stay. Montana cowboy artist Charles M. Russell, also known as C.M. Russell, was a frequent guest during the 1920s and was said to have etched artwork into the original fireplace hearth in the dining hall. In fact, the main dining room has been named after him. Built in 1913, Lake McDonald Lodge is such a throwback in time. Seriously, when you walk in, you almost expect to see women in roaring 20s flappers dresses and men in white sweaters strolling around with croquet mallets resting lazily on their shoulders. Did I paint the picture for you okay? First built in 1895 by John Lewis, he cleverly called it the Lewis Glacier Hotel. When visitors arrived by train to West Glacier, they took a steamboat from Apgar at the south end of the lake. Well, Lewis built his lodge in the Swiss style, but with a bit of a Western hunting lodge influence. Now, I am not an authority on interior design, but the rustic artwork, rich wood, and countless animal heads on the walls are a dead giveaway, right? Just like all the other railway hotels, it had to compete for the attention of all those tourists. And a highly desired place. In 1930, the Great Northern Railway bought John Lewis's hotel, and in 1957 changed the lodge name to Lake McDonald Lodge. Now, sadly, a flood in 1964 damaged the lodge and destroyed the Russell artwork, the stone fireplace in the dining room, and more. Must have been quite a torrent considering how small Snyder Creek is that sat between the lodge and the employee housing. But the lodge was restored and is now a National Historic Landmark. In fact, I've stayed in one of the cabins, and just like the lodge, they are a rustic delight. And by that I mean there are no TVs, alarm clocks, or telephones in the minimalistic rooms. I'm sure you can imagine it is still a popular experience, and you will need to make reservations months in advance. If there's anything we need right now, you'll find a general store right next door.
We can go through. Yeah.
12.
Yeah. We keep going. 9. 7, 6. Yay.
Challenging, but actually quite popular 8 miles out and back hike.
Yeah, I already said that.
I sure hope we scored a nice sunny day, because the view across the lake is serenely beautiful. This is Lake McDonald that we're driving alongside, and it's the largest lake in Glacier National Park. We'll get to drive close by its shore for almost all of its full 10-mile length. Now, not to do too much how wide, how tall, how long type of talk, but since I already said it was the biggest, I guess I will just this one time. So as I said, 10 miles long, about 1.5 miles across at its widest, and 472 feet deep at its deepest. Maybe I'll see if you can remember those numbers at the end of the day. Oh, do we have any fishermen? Fisher persons in the car? Lake with its cold, clear water and getting a little excited. Sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but the fishing in the lake is not all that good. It used to be, and it's had a terrible effect on the native fish. If you're not a fishing enthusiast, you might wonder what all the fuss is about. Bull trout, lake trout, all the same kind of fish, nearly, right? Well, the problem is that introduced lake trout love eating the baby fish of the native trout species. So quickly, the lake has become dominated by the lake trout. Bull trout, cutthroats, and rainbow trout still remain a small population in the lake, but they're definitely more difficult to catch. And when you're fishing, catching lake trout is kind of boring. They're relatively easy to catch and don't put up much of a fight. The best way to enjoy Lake McDonald from the water is to get out there in a canoe and paddle along the shores, especially on the north side, away from the road. Stunning. Throughout its history, Glacier National Park has had a lot of bears. While there are populations of both black bears and grizzlies, grizzlies are fewer in number. While the science behind bear counts is not exact, park staff estimate the grizzly bear population around 300. If we saw any bears today, well, congratulations. Most visitors don't get that lucky. Back when construction workers were building this road, bears saw the employee camps as an all-you-can-eat buffet. They're very inventive in their attempts to deter the black bears from entering the meat shed. The bears were persistent. I mean, we've all seen the Yogi Bear cartoons, haven't we? Hey, boo-boo! What's that we steal all this picnic basket? Bear is a dead bear. He ate food with humans. It tends to end up getting too close to humans for encounters to be safe for both the bears and people. Often, bears reliant on human garbage get destructive. They'll break into cars and homes and dumpsters. Often those bears can end up having to be euthanized, which means we humans didn't do a good enough job securing our food. We talked earlier about the differences between black bears and grizzly bears, which are also called brown bears. Remember what they are? A grizzly bear has a more dish-like or rounder face, whereas black bear faces are more pointed and slender. We'll know we're looking at a grizzly right away if we can see a large hump. A fair amount, shall we say. The legend is that he bet the lakefront hotel in a poker game and lost. Now, whether that's legend or truth is unclear, but in 1906, John Lewis now held the property. Lewis actually moved the original hotel building to the back of the property and set to very convenient and lucky because the lake only freezes solid about 1 in every 5 years or so. That was a whole lot easier than lugging materials through 10 miles of forest trail on the shore of the lake. George Snyder's reputation, and he was considered somewhat different from the area. Despite that, he was able to his story. George Snyder managed to seriously injure himself to Kalispell. Western history is filled with characters like George Snyder, isn't it? You just have to admire how thick the forest is here in the park, don't you? But with thick trees comes the opportunity for horrible fires. Like across to the other shore. We can still see the effects of the 2003 Robert fire that swept across the entire Apgar Range, and more recent park fires that led Lake McDonald Lodge and the area around us to be evacuated multiple times. Forest fires are a natural phenomenon that help rejuvenate the landscape. Really thick forest actually suppresses the ability for wildlife to thrive. Thick forest means a thick canopy and too much shade. When very little sunlight directly reaches the ground, it's pretty difficult for new plants to start off, or for berries and fruits to ripen. You know, the kind of stuff that animals like to eat. Plus, thick forest is just as difficult to walk through if you're an animal as it is. So, fire can be a good thing. It opens up the forest to new growth and grassy meadows. But when the summer seasons are dry, the whole forest can go up in flames very quickly. Can you imagine how scary it would be to be around a forest wildfire? A fire across the lake was part of a tough summer when 13% of the park's forest burned. Firefighters in national parks tend to concentrate on protecting infrastructure and buildings. If none of those things are threatened, they'll often let the fire burn itself. Well, we only have a few more minutes, and we'll have completed our drive on the Going to the Sun Road, one of the great drives in our national parks. I want to give us directions into the town of West Glacier, which, if you have a good memory, you might recall me saying was where the train used to stop and bring guests to the park before the road existed. Its original name was Belton. Now, before we reach West Glacier, we have the opportunity to stop at Apgar Village. That was the original launch location where visitors would ride on George Snyder's steamboat for that 10-mile trip to his lodge. Originally called Snyder Hotel, then Lewis Glacier Hotel when it changed hands, and then finally Lake McDonald Lodge. Before the park, homesteaders had acquired land, and loggers and miners were active in the Apgar was named for Milo Apgar, who in 1892, with his business partner, had already started providing lodging, services, outfitting, and tours to the earliest Great Northern Railway clientele, making Apgar a kind of service gateway to the wilderness. And if we go further than that, Lake McDonald is believed to have been named for a trader named Duncan McDonald, who earned his namesake by carving his name into a tree in 1878. Do not think you're going to get any lakes named after you. Keep those pocket knives in your pocket. Today, Apgar is very modest, known as a place to get a coffee or an ice cream, maybe pick up an authentic Montana gift, or rent a boat or stay in a cabin. The national park's most popular campground is located there too. If you go, stand on the lake shore and imagine those hardy early travelers and even hardier folks determined to provide those services. A little bit busy as we get to West Glacier, so I'm going to take a moment to say thank you so much for bringing me along to be your guide for this drive. I hope you enjoyed our tour, and if you did, would you do me the biggest favor and post a review and share your experience with other travelers who might not know just how fun it is to travel with me? I don't know where your travels will take you next, but if you're heading across the border to the Canadian Rockies, I have tours to look back towards Yellowstone and Grand Teton. We're heading to the coast. Yep, I've got tours in Olympic National Explore menu here in the app, or even go to my website at GuideAlong.com, where you can see all the tour destinations that we have. Maybe we'll even see you in Hawaii sometime. All right, we're approaching the west entrance to the park very soon. For the small town of West Glacier, or if you'd like to leave the park, we'll turn left at the stop sign after this curve. For the Apgar Visitor Center, we'll take a right. For the historic Apgar Village, we'll just keep going straight ahead. We'll take our first right Apgar Loop Road to see the Apgar area. Apgar Village has lodging, a small restaurant, also the Cedar Tree gift shop that sells ice cream and espresso if we'd like to stop for that. In fact, I think the Cedar Tree gift shop is well worth a look if we're looking for some type of Montana-made souvenir. The building actually has live old-growth cedar trees growing in it. Now, you might think I'm joking. I am not. It is so cool. The builders didn't want to cut them down, so they built the shop around them. All right, one more time. Left to exit the park, straight for Apgar, or right for the visitor center.
much about the sunset idea?
There.
Mm-hmm.
Take a look. The ball's right over there.
Okay.
The ball.
Oh, I see one.
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh, look at that. Just like pouring. See?
It
See?
is pouring.
Oh, 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 two boats.
I don't know if I'm getting it or not. Look at the water.
Yeah. You see, look at that guy again.